The golden chandelier cast fractured light across the mahogany table as Al Pacino stared at the contract that could end his career. $10 million. More money than most people see in 10 lifetimes. All he had to do was become someone else. Beverly Hills, October 1982. The Paramount Pictures executive boardroom sits on the 14th floor of a gleaming tower that overlooks the city of dreams. Floor-to-ceiling windows reveal the sprawling landscape of Los Angeles, where ambition and broken promises stretch from the Hollywood Hills to the Pacific Ocean. This room has seen empires built and legends destroyed. Today, it would witness one man's choice between fortune and soul. Al Pacino sits across from studio head Barry Morrison, a man whose handshake can greenlight $100 million productions or kill careers with a single phone call. Morrison is 63, silver-haired, wearing a suit that costs more than most people's cars. His office walls display photographs with every major star of the past 3 decades, all smiling, all grateful for his approval. He's the kind of Hollywood power broker who speaks in numbers and thinks in profit margins. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. It's now 2:47, and Al has barely spoken. He's wearing his usual simple black jacket, white shirt, no tie. At 42, he's already given the world Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, and The Godfather saga. He should feel untouchable. Instead, he feels like prey. Morrison leans back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, studying Al with the cold calculation of a man who's bought and sold human dreams for 30 years. The silence stretches between them like a chasm. Outside, Los Angeles traffic creates a distant hum, the sound of 8 million people chasing their version of success. 10 million, Morrison finally says, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. More than Brando got for Superman. More than Nicholson got for The Shining. More than any actor has ever been offered for changing their approach. Al's fingers drum silently on the polished table. He doesn't look at the contract, doesn't look at Morrison. His eyes focus on something beyond the windows, beyond the city, perhaps beyond the entire industry that made him famous. Morrison continues, his tone shifting from formal to paternal, like a father explaining harsh reality to a stubborn child. Al, let me be direct. Your method acting, your intensity, your dramatic choices. They're becoming a problem. Audiences want entertainment, not therapy sessions. They want heroes, not tortured souls having nervous breakdowns on screen. The words hang in the air like smoke. Morrison opens a folder, slides several papers across the table. Market research reports. Focus group data. Box office projections. All the sacred texts of modern Hollywood, all telling the same story. Al Pacino's artistic integrity is becoming commercially inconvenient. Look at these numbers, Morrison says, tapping the papers with a gold pen. Serpico tested poorly with audiences outside major cities. Dog Day Afternoon made critics happy but barely broke even. Even Scarface is being called too intense by preview audiences. You're scaring people, Al. Al finally looks up, his dark eyes meeting Morrison's pale blue ones. In that gaze, Morrison sees something that makes him slightly uncomfortable. It's not anger or defiance. It's deeper than that. It's the look of a man who's spent his entire life digging for truth and isn't about to stop now. What exactly are you asking me to change? Al's voice is quiet, controlled, but there's an undercurrent of something dangerous, like the moment before thunder. Morrison relaxes, sensing cooperation. He's had this conversation before with other difficult actors. They always come around when enough money hits the table. Simple adjustments. Less brooding. More charm. Think Cary Grant meets John Wayne. Audiences want to like their heroes, not worry about their psychological well-being. Morrison stands, walks to the window, gestures at the city below. Look out there, Al, 8 million people working, struggling, trying to pay rent and feed their families. When they spend their hard-earned money on a movie ticket, they want escape. They want to forget their problems for 2 hours, not watch someone else's neuroses played out in extreme close-up. He turns back to Al, his expression becoming more intense. I'm not asking you to become a different person. I'm asking you to become a more commercial person. Robert Redford did it. Warren Beatty did it. They kept their artistic credibility and became bankable stars. That's all we want. Al stands slowly, his chair rolling backward silently on the thick carpet. He walks to a different window, one that faces west toward the ocean. The afternoon sun catches the gray threading through his dark hair, makes his skin look older than his years. The weight of fame, of expectations, of constant scrutiny has aged him in ways that surprise people who remember the young actor from The Godfather. You know what I was before acting? Al asks, his back still to Morrison. I was a messenger boy in the Bronx. 19 years old, riding a bike through traffic, delivering packages to people who never looked at me twice. Invisible. Morrison remains quiet, sensing this is important, this glimpse into the man behind the intensity. One day I delivered a package to an office building in Manhattan. While I was waiting for a signature, I heard voices coming from down the hall. Real voices, not the fake politeness people use with messengers. I followed the sound and found myself looking through an open door into a rehearsal room. Actors working on a scene, completely lost in imaginary circumstances, feeling real emotions about fictional events. Al turns from the window, his eyes distant with memory. I watched for maybe 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, I saw people transform completely. Become other people, feel other lives, explore parts of themselves they probably never knew existed. It was like watching magic. Morrison nods politely, but his fingers tap impatiently on the desk. He's heard artistic origin stories before. They all end the same way, with compromise and a signed contract. Al moves back toward the table, but he doesn't sit. Instead, he picks up the contract, hefts its weight, flips through pages dense with legal language and financial promises. $10 million. Enough to buy houses, cars, security for generations. Enough to make his children's children comfortable. All for agreeing to dial back the intensity that made him famous in the first place. This contract, Al says, setting it down carefully, requires me to submit all future role choices for studio approval. It requires me to work with an acting coach who will help me develop a more accessible style. It requires me to do promotional appearances where I demonstrate this new, improved version of myself. Morrison nods enthusiastically. Exactly. Think of it as evolution, not compromise. You'll still be Al Pacino, just a more audience-friendly version. And if I refuse? The temperature in the room seems to drop 10 degrees. Morrison's smile becomes thinner, more predatory. This is the moment every difficult actor eventually reaches, the moment they discover how expendable they really are. Then you become a very talented actor who can't get work, Morrison says, his voice losing all pretense of warmth. Studios talk, Al, word gets around. Difficult. Unpredictable. Uncommercial. Those words follow actors to every audition, every meeting, every opportunity. Morrison walks back to his chair, sits down with the confidence of a man who holds all the cards. I've seen it happen to better actors than you. Method actors who thought their artistic integrity was more important than their career longevity. Where are they now? Teaching acting classes in strip mall studios, doing dinner theater, appearing in commercials for products they don't believe in. The threat hangs in the air like poison gas. Al has seen those actors, has heard the whispered stories of careers destroyed by the simple act of refusing to play the game. Hollywood is littered with the bones of artists who thought their talent would protect them from the business side of show business. Al sits back down, picks up the contract again. The pages rustle in the silence. Outside, the sun continues its descent toward the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Beautiful and temporary, like everything else in this city. You know what's funny about that rehearsal room I stumbled into? Al says, his voice conversational, almost friendly. The actors weren't trying to be likable. They weren't trying to be commercial. They were trying to be truthful. That's all. Just truthful. Morrison's patience is wearing thin. He's got 3 more meetings today, deals to close, careers to shape. Truth doesn't sell tickets, Al, entertainment sells tickets. Does it? Al looks up from the contract, his eyes sharp now, focused. Because I seem to remember The Godfather making quite a bit of money. Serpico did pretty well too, despite what your research says. Maybe audiences are smarter than your focus groups give them credit for. Morrison's jaw tightens. This isn't going the way these conversations usually go. Most actors collapse under the weight of financial pressure and career threats. Al Pacino seems to be getting stronger. The Godfather was an ensemble piece, Morrison says dismissively. Serpico was a fluke. What matters is future viability, and your current trajectory is pointing toward artistic credibility and commercial irrelevance. Al stands again, but this time his movement is different. Not restless, not contemplative. Decisive. He walks to the chair across from Morrison, leans forward slightly, his hands flat on the table. Let me tell you what I think about your offer, Al says, his voice quiet but carrying an intensity that makes Morrison lean back instinctively. But just as Al opens his mouth to continue, the conference room door swings open. The conference room door swings open, and Morrison's assistant Jennifer rushes in, her face flushed with urgency. Mr. Morrison, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Francis Ford Coppola is on line 1. He says it's about the Godfather Legacy project and he needs to speak with you immediately. Morrison's eyes widen slightly. Coppola calling about Godfather means money. Big money. He looks between Al and the phone, torn between closing this deal and taking what could be an even bigger opportunity. Tell Francis I'll call him back in 10 minutes, Morrison says, his voice strained with the effort of prioritizing. He said it can't wait, sir. Something about Al Pacino and a new trilogy concept. The room goes dead silent. Al's eyebrows raise slightly, but his expression remains unreadable. Morrison's face cycles through confusion, irritation, and then sudden understanding. His eyes narrow as he looks at Al. You knew about this call, Morrison says, his voice low and dangerous. Al shrugs slightly, a ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Francis and I had lunch yesterday. Old friends catching up. Morrison realizes he's been outmaneuvered. Whatever Coppola is proposing involves Al, which means Al has leverage Morrison didn't know about. The power dynamic in the room shifts like a seismic plate movement. Take a message, Morrison tells Jennifer curtly. She hesitates, then nods and leaves, closing the door behind her. Morrison sits back down heavily, his earlier confidence evaporating. What did you tell Coppola? I told him the truth, Al says, settling back into his chair with a relaxed posture that wasn't there before. That I'm being pressured to change my acting style to become more commercial. Francis found that interesting. Morrison's hands clench into fists on the table. Coppola's opinion carries enormous weight in Hollywood. If he starts telling people that studios are trying to neuter Al Pacino's artistic integrity, it could create a public relations nightmare. This is extortion, Morrison says through gritted teeth. No, Al replies calmly, this is what you call market forces. Supply and demand. You want me to change who I am. Francis wants me to stay exactly who I am. Guess which offer sounds more appealing? Morrison stands abruptly, walks to the window, his mind racing. He's spent 30 years in this business, and he knows when he's lost control of a negotiation. But he also knows he can't let Al Pacino walk out of this room without some kind of resolution. Too much is at stake. What do you want? Morrison asks, his back still to Al. I want you to understand something about acting, Al says, his voice taking on the intensity that made him famous. When I prepare for a role, I don't just memorize lines and hit marks. I find the truth of that character. I dig until I reach something real, something that connects with audiences on a level deeper than entertainment. Al stands, joins Morrison at the window. Side by side, they look out at the city that has made and destroyed more dreams than any other place on earth. You see those people down there? Al continues, pointing at the tiny figures moving along the sidewalks 14 floors below. They're not stupid. They don't just want to be distracted from their problems. They want to feel understood. They want to see their struggles, their hopes, their fears reflected back at them by someone who's willing to go to those dark places. Morrison turns to face Al, his expression softer now, more thoughtful. But the market research. The market research tells you what people think they want, Al interrupts. Not what they actually need. When audiences watch Serpico, they're not just watching a cop movie. They're watching a man struggle with integrity in a corrupt system. When they watch Dog Day Afternoon, they're not just watching a bank robbery. They're watching someone desperate enough to risk everything for love. Al moves back to the table, picks up one of Morrison's market research reports. This paper tells you that my intensity scores poorly with focus groups. But it doesn't measure the letters I get from people saying my movies helped them through difficult times. It doesn't count the acting students who tell me they became actors because they saw someone on screen willing to be completely vulnerable. Morrison returns to his chair, but he doesn't sit. He stands behind it, his hands gripping the leather back. For the first time in years, he's questioning assumptions that have guided his entire career. The business has changed, Al, Morrison says, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. Audiences are younger, attention spans are shorter. Movies are competing with video games, cable television, 100 other distractions. So your solution is to make movies more like those distractions? Al asks. More surface, less depth. More noise, less truth. Al walks around the table until he's standing directly across from Morrison, only 3 feet of polished wood between them. Let me tell you what happened at the Scarface preview you mentioned. Yes, some people walked out. But I also saw something else. Al's eyes take on that distant quality again, the look of someone accessing a powerful memory. There was a kid, maybe 19, sitting 3 rows ahead of me. Latino kid, probably from East LA. During the final scene, when Tony Montana makes his last stand, this kid was crying. Not because he was sad, but because he was seeing his own neighborhood, his own struggles, reflected on a movie screen for the first time. Morrison's grip on the chair loosened slightly. After the screening, I saw him in the lobby. He came up to me, could barely speak English, and he said, "Thank you for showing my life." That kid didn't need me to be more charming or more likable. He needed me to be real. The silence that follows is different from the earlier tension. It's contemplative, weighted with possibilities rather than threats. Morrison slowly sits down, his corporate armor showing cracks. What if you're wrong? What if authenticity doesn't translate to commercial success anymore? Al sits across from him, leans forward slightly. Then I'll have failed on my own terms rather than succeeded on someone else's. Morrison laughs, a short, bitter sound. That's very noble, Al. But nobility doesn't pay development costs or marketing budgets. No, Al agrees, but it does create the kind of movies people remember 20 years later. The kind of performances that define careers and change the industry. Morrison picks up the contract, stares at it as if seeing it for the first time. $10 million. A fortune by any standard. But sitting across from Al Pacino, hearing the passion in his voice, seeing the conviction in his eyes, the money suddenly feels like small change. Francis Coppola wants to work with you again, Morrison says, not really a question. He wants to explore what happens when an actor is allowed to go as deep as the material demands, Al replies. No compromises, no market research, no focus groups. Just truth. Morrison sets the contract down, pushes it slightly toward the center of the table. For a moment, it sits there between them like a bridge neither man wants to cross. You know what's funny? Morrison says, his voice thoughtful. I became a studio head because I loved movies. Real movies. The kind that made me want to work in this business in the first place. Somewhere along the way, I started thinking more about profit margins than stories. Al nods, understanding in his eyes. It happens to all of us. The business side tries to eat the art side. The question is what you do when you realize it's happening. Morrison looks out the window again, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. The sky is painted in brilliant oranges and purples now, the kind of sunset that looks too beautiful to be real. If I tear up this contract, Morrison says slowly, if I let you continue making movies your way, can you promise me they'll connect with audiences? Al considers the question seriously. I can promise you they'll be honest. Sometimes honesty connects, sometimes it doesn't. But at least we'll know we tried to say something worth saying. Morrison reaches for the contract, holds it for a moment, then slowly tears it in half. The sound of ripping paper seems impossibly loud in the quiet room. Make your movies, Al, Morrison says, dropping the pieces into a wastebasket. Make them your way. Al stands, extends his hand across the table. Morrison shakes it, and for a moment, both men feel like they've accomplished something more important than a business deal. One condition, Morrison adds, not releasing Al's hand. Al raises an eyebrow. When you win the Oscar for one of these uncompromising performances, remember this conversation. Al smiles, a real smile this time. I'll remember that a studio head chose art over profit. That might be worth more than any Oscar. As Al walks toward the door, Morrison calls after him. Al? That kid at the Scarface screening. Did you ever see him again? Al turns back, his hand on the door handle. Yeah. He became an actor. Uses his real name, tells his own stories. Turns out authenticity is contagious. The door closes softly behind Al, leaving Morrison alone with the sunset and the torn pieces of a contract that would have changed everything. Outside, Los Angeles continues its eternal dance of dreams and reality, but in one Beverly Hills boardroom, something shifted. Something real won over something profitable. And sometimes, in Hollywood, that's the rarest victory of all. 3 months later, Al Pacino began filming Scarecrow with complete creative control. The movie would go on to win the Palme d'Or at Cannes and cement his reputation as an actor unwilling to compromise his artistic vision. Barry Morrison would later call that October afternoon the best business decision he never made.